This
accomplish to be
conference
able
will now be recorded.
get this log this participation, as well as to capture the information about your specific organizations. And if at any time you've got a question or anything, please make use of the chat. Go ahead and type that question in there. That way you don't have to worry about the awkwardness of unmuting yourself on phone or all this other stuff and having your dog in the background barking. But if you got any questions, by all means, please ask. And again, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Please stay safe and have a great rest of your week if I don't talk to you between now and then. And I thank you again for your participation. So I'll turn this back over to Anna and her team. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Tom. And again, thank you to everyone who has taken the time out of their afternoon to join us for this meeting. Your participation is really critical to making this plan everything that you, your county, your jurisdictions need. So we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Anna Vanderswag. I am an associate planner with Burton Planning Services, and Clinton County has selected us to update your hazard mitigation plan. And I'll go ahead and let my colleagues, we have Brett and Rushi on the call with us today. I'll let them introduce themselves as well. So Brett.
My name is Brett Morris, and I'm an associate planner with Burton Planning Services. I have been working on the mitigation actions, the mapping, and the general writing for the plan.
Great.
Hello everyone, my name is Ruchi. I'm an associate planner with Burton Planning Services. I am assisting with public involvement activities and plan preparation. Thanks for joining us.
Great, thanks. In addition to those of us that are on the call, we have a few more team members that assist through the back end side of things. So Kimberly Burton is the project manager. She's also the president of the company. We also have a senior hazards specialist, Rich Roths, who helps us develop these mitigation strategies to include in the plan. And we'll get more into those strategies here a bit down the line. You all, thank you for joining us. I think we have another person by phone who's joined, so I'll go ahead and let you know. I'll have some information coming up again with my phone number for how you can let us know that you are calling in. But all of you together, you make up the core planning committee for this plan, and your participation is extremely important. So again, thank you for taking the time to join us. Here it is again. The next reminder, there's some housekeeping that comes along with doing things in a virtual format. So again, you have multiple methods that you can use to sign in. The first is the SurveyMonkey, the online way to just enter your name and phone number and all that information. That link is in the chat box. You can also just put your name, email, and phone number and who you're representing in the chat box as well. My colleagues are monitoring the chat, so they'll be there. If you have any questions at all, feel free to type those in the chat. If you're calling in by phone, you can sign in by just texting me at 614-406-7775. Again, that's 614-406-7775. And also, if you have called in and you have a question, we understand you can't access the chat box, feel free to unmute yourself using *6, and you can just ask your question. Or if you have any comments as we're going through some of the things down the line, please feel free to interject. That is perfectly okay. So we have multiple versions of the surveys available for you, and they're all available on the project's website. So my colleagues will post the link in the chat box. It's burtonplanning.com/Clinton-HMP. And I'll go ahead and show you everything that is on that. As Tom said, if you experience some connectivity issues or you'd like to go back and watch this meeting down the road, you're more than welcome to do so. We will have that posted on the website. everything here, we have information about the plan, including a general introduction, as well, and the previous plan as well from 2016. We have all of the meeting materials from meeting 1, including links to the meetings that, the recordings of the meetings. If you were unable to attend the first meeting, we do recommend that you go through and watch those recordings and complete the surveys. So as I said, there are multiple versions of each survey. We have a printable form that you can just print and complete by hand, and then email, fax, mail it to the county EMA. You can also do the fillable survey using Adobe. You just download it, and then you can attach it to an email and send it to the county EMA that way. And each survey, there's an online version of the survey through SurveyMonkey, and that link is on the website here. So again, all of the meeting materials and surveys from the first meeting are here. If you did not attend, we request that you do complete those surveys. We will need participation from each jurisdiction. So if you represent a jurisdiction that you know there wasn't representation at that first meeting, please make sure that someone from your jurisdiction completes these surveys. It will help ensure that your community can get funding in the event of a disaster. So we will go into more details about that later. But again, all of the meeting materials here for meeting 2 are also on the website. There's a tab for meeting 2 materials. It has the agenda for today, as well as a PDF of all of the presentation that I am going through. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat. The link to this website is also in the chat. So moving into what we are here doing today, we are here to update the 2016 Clinton County Hazard Mitigation Plan. So I'll take you through an overview of hazard mitigation just to refresh your mind. And then I'll give you a progress update on where we are in the planning process. And then we'll spend the bulk of the time turning to you to gather some of your input on what projects your communities would like to see implemented over the next several years in order to reduce your risk from the hazard events that you have identified. So I'll go ahead and jump into the overview of hazard mitigation. Hazard mitigation is a sustained action to reduce or eliminate the long-term risk to human life and property associated with hazards. These hazards can include anything from flooding, tornadoes, hazardous materials. We'll go through a whole list in a little bit. Goals of hazard mitigation planning include reducing potential losses from future disasters, identifying natural and human-caused hazards, and identifying actions or projects that can be implemented to reduce losses associated with those hazard events. And finally, we're looking to establish a process to implement those actions. So this is the list of all potential types of hazards that can be included. You have the water-based hazards such as flooding and dam failure, wind-based hazards like hurricanes, tornadoes, and damaging winds. You can have severe summer and winter weather. Then you have hazards that kind of stem from a lack of water, so drought, wildfires, extreme heat, geological-based hazards such as landslides and earthquakes. And then some counties like to include things like invasive species. And we also have the man-made hazards like hazardous materials and terrorism. So this is an overview of the disaster response cycle. We are here in the mitigation step, which is well before a disaster takes place. Our goal here is to implement projects that reduce your risk well before any hazard event occurs. The next step is preparedness. This is when a disaster is imminent. This is when an emergency operations plan comes into play. And sometimes what's interesting, these first two steps, I mean, really all of these steps can occur at times simultaneously. So now take, for instance, COVID-19, we're in the middle of it. So we are actively responding to the epidemic, which is considered a disaster. It is included in your plan. At the same time that we are preparing and trying to mitigate epidemics going forward. So we're also here in step 3, which is the response. So this is when a disaster is actively occurring, and this is the short-term emergency aid and assistance. That's when that comes into play. And finally, you have the recovery step. This is after disaster occurs, and this is when disaster recovery planning comes into play. So there are a few legal foundations for the hazard mitigation planning process. The first is the Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act from 1988. And this said that presidential disaster declarations can trigger federal assistance through FEMA. And then in 2000, the Disaster Mitigation Act formed the legal basis for FEMA's state, local, and tribal mitigation planning requirements. And this is what said that jurisdictions must have an adopted plan if they need to receive funds from FEMA in the event of a disaster. So a little bit more along those lines, in order to receive FEMA funding, hazard mitigation plans must be adopted by local jurisdictions and updated every 5 years. Hazard mitigation plans must include public participation and documented update process, include existing conditions and demographics of the county and its jurisdictions, include any major disaster declarations since the previous plan, so in this case since 2016, and then for each hazard that you want included in the plan, we perform risk assessments and vulnerability analyses for each of those hazards. Additionally, we develop mitigation actions or projects to include in the plan, and we identify the status of actions that were included in your previous plan in order to get an accurate status update on those. The plan must also include a plan for maintenance and updating. So there are some funding opportunities that can come from hazard mitigation planning. Projects that can be included in the plan include things like property acquisition, demolition and relocation, property reconstruction, structure elevating and floodproofing. Also things like purchasing generators, installation of safe rooms, and soil stabilization projects are things that can be included in the hazard mitigation plan as projects. And we will go through a complete list of projects that were identified from our previous meeting, as well as things that we have researched based on your hazard history in your county. So we'll go through that list together and identify which projects you want to see happen in your community. So there are lots of benefits associated with hazard mitigation planning. The first benefit is the minimizing of property damage, minimizing economic losses, injuries, and loss of human life from these hazard events. At the same time, we're enhancing public awareness and education of natural and man-made hazards. And this process also helps coordinate interjurisdictional preparedness measures, as well as projects and programs for efficient and effective implementation. In this process, we aim to provide tools for decision makers to better prepare for disasters, and we help the county achieve state and federal regulatory compliance in order to be eligible for funding. So kind of reiterating some of what I said before about projects that can be included in the plan, we'll go through more specific details about which projects you all selected to be included in the plan and go through that list together. Are there any questions about that hazard mitigation introduction? Feel free to unmute yourself or post your question in the chat. Our next step will be going into the more specific structure and schedule for this project. So if there's any general questions, now would be a good time. All right, we'll go ahead and move forward. So this slide provides an overview of the process and schedule of the hazard mitigation plan, including completed and upcoming tasks. So far we've gathered critical facility information about the county and jurisdictions. We've gathered repetitive loss property information. We have also summarized features and demographics of the county and its communities, and we've gathered historical information on previous hazard events. As part of this, we've collected the base mapping through GIS, and we've used this to help get a basic understanding of the county, as well as identify past and potential hazards to include in this plan. And we've also identified a list of mitigation actions, both from the previous plan, as well as new projects that can be included going forward. So today, our goal is to take this list of mitigation actions and go through them all together in order to identify which projects you want to see included or completed by your communities. So there are 8 milestones to the planning process. Today, we are completing milestone 4 by holding the second planning meeting. So far, we've done the risk assessments. We had the first planning meeting back in June. And going forward, we will finalize a draft of the plan, and we will put the plan out for review by both the EMA as well as all of you as the core planning committee. You will have an opportunity to review the draft plan. It'll also go out to the public, and once we take all of those comments, we'll send it to the state level EMA for their review, and possibly FEMA for their review and approval as well. Once it's been approved by FEMA, we return it to you to adopt it at the local level. So each jurisdiction, we encourage you to adopt the plan. Again, it helps you remain eligible for funding in the event of a disaster. So this is just a visual of the planning process. Again, we're maybe about halfway in terms of the whole process of the schedule. We're aiming to have the plan adopted by February of 2021. But then the next step that we will look to collect feedback from you all after today is about November. So look for some more announcements in the near future, in the next couple months, to let you know how you can still participate going forward. And you can also check back on the website. We'll be keeping that up to date as well. All right, are there any questions about our schedule or the process of planning? Okay. Then we will go over your role as members of the core planning committee. So your role is to provide local knowledge and data as needed, including history, demographics, spatial information. You also help identify potential hazards based on previous experience and prioritize those hazards based on risk. So that took place at the previous meeting. We had you identify which hazards you thought were of most concern. And we'll go over those survey results here in just a little bit. But in addition to identifying those hazards and prioritizing them, we also turn to you to help us develop a new kind of an implementation plan for your county. So we turn to you to identify which projects you want to complete and also rate those using a series of criteria. So that way we can collect all of your feedback and give you a plan that you can implement going forward. We also ask that you participate both in the planning meetings as well as by completing these surveys, and then assist in plan adoption for representative local jurisdictions. So let's go over those survey results. Oh, here's my friendly reminder. If you have not signed in, if you've joined in a little bit late, there is a SurveyMonkey link that you can use to sign in. If you have called in on the phone, you can send me a text or email Tom Breckel at the Clinton County EMA. So if you want to text me, you can text me at 614-406-7775. Again, that's 614-406-7775. I forgot to say earlier that if you are in an office with multiple people, I know it's rare at this point in time, but if there are multiple people calling in from one office, we need each person to sign in. So you can either text or email or put your name in the chat, but we need all of you to sign in. All right, so if you will recall, for those of you that attended the first meeting, we had you complete a hazard priority survey. If you did not attend and you have access to a phone where you can, or a tablet where you can take this survey, the QR code in the top right corner.
Anna, you got muted. We can't hear.
You can't hear me?
You cut out. I don't know if you cut out for everyone, but
No, you're fine for me.
You're good.
Okay, thanks.
okay.
So again, if you have access to the internet and you didn't complete this survey the first time around, the QR code will take you directly to the digital version of the survey. You can also print those surveys from the website. So if you recall, we had you complete a survey where you were asked to rate the threat that each hazard poses to your community on a scale of 0 to 5, with 0 signifying that there was no threat from that hazard, and we could exclude it from the plan. A 5 meant that that hazard posed the greatest threat to your community. We did not receive hardly any zeros, so most of these hazards, all of you thought needed to be included. And we also had quite a significant conversation at the last meeting about the issue of drug misuse and addiction that occurs at the county, throughout the county, and in your local communities. So we took that and we are working on the risk assessment for that as well. However, that was not included in the previous survey. So if you have not already been asked to provide a score from 0 to 5 for the hazard of drug misuse and addiction, I'm seeing my typo now as on the screen, but drug misuse and addiction, if you would put a score from 0 to 5 in the chat, with, again, 0 meaning that hazard poses no threat to your community, and 5 being that hazard poses the greatest threat to your community. We'll go ahead and give you a couple minutes. If you called in by phone and you'd like to announce yourself and leave a score for us to record, that would be great as well. You can also email that score to us after the meeting as well.
Anna, do you need to provide a little more information on the difference between frequency or severity as it relates to how people will determine what their priority is?
That is a good question. We tend to get that question. We are looking for an overall, kind of if you would average the two, we are looking for an overall assessment of the threat to your community based on this hazard. I don't know, Brett, if you would have anything to add to that.
No, yeah, a general sort of overall combination of, I mean, I would let people rate it however they're thinking, severity or frequency, whichever is most important to them, they can let that sort of carry the decision here. But we are just looking for the one score.
Great, we have a few scores coming through. Awesome. Does anyone who's called in want to rate it on a scale of 0 to 5? You can unmute using *6 and just say your name and what score you would give it. Oh, this is great. Some of you are also texting me. So if you want to text me your score at 614-406-7775, that works as well. Great. Awesome. The more scores we have, the more tuned in this plan will be to what you need. So we take these scores and these rankings that you see on the screen help us, again, develop that implementation plan of which projects your community should prioritize above others, that kind of thing. And we'll also be looking for significant feedback on this section as we post the plan come November for your review. So you can see, and for those of you who have called in, I'll try to describe it the best I can, but feel free to ask questions. Your county said that severe wind and tornadoes was posed the greatest threat above all other hazards, followed by epidemic and pandemic, which is kind of evident given COVID-19 and how that is affecting our communities at the moment. And then utility failure. So again, the top 3 hazards that you identified as the greatest threat were severe wind and tornadoes, epidemic and pandemic, and utility failure. The 3 that you rated the lowest, saying they had the least threat, posed the least threat to your community, were landslides, erosion, and mine subsidence, wildfire, and earthquakes. So those were on the bottom. Are there any questions or surprises from what you see on the screen? I'd be curious what your thoughts are on how this actually took shape. Any surprises?
If I interpreted your question correctly, Anna, there's been a meeting that took place, I want to say last Thursday, I believe, and it was Wilmington City Council has taken up this subject of some of the issues associated around vagrancy and how it is related to a spike in crime. Now, some of it would be described as kind of minor crime, but still, if it's your household or your personal belongings or whatever, then that's kind of contributing to that. A huge element of that was identified as being drug related. When this first topic came up, it was Mayor Mongold from Sabina, who unfortunately isn't able to be with us for today's meeting. But they have issues that for unoccupied buildings, they have squatters and people that are using them for uses They have needles that are being left in public park areas where kids are getting stuck. There is the example given during the Wilmington City Council meeting from Dr. Manseer, who was relayed by a representative at the meeting, about 3 different instances of kids that were stuck with needles while playing in a local park. So while it may not be as extreme as the winds coming through ripping a roof off of a house, the frequency and impact that it has on the individuals or those people that are nearby probably occur more frequently than some of the different storms and some of the different things that happen. So in this instance, when I look at the way I rated it, I leaned more toward the frequency and less toward the severity, because as a county, we have been very lucky, knock on wood, of the low impact of storms over in our county over, I believe, the last 6 to 7 years. Now, if you go back long enough, you can always find a great example to prove contrary to what anyone else says. But fortunately, when you look at the different counties around us, we tend to get off a little easier than most. And I will go back to silence.
Thank you, Tom. I'm just getting some comments via text regarding storage of chemicals and concern about that, especially in light of what has happened in Beirut yesterday. And considering that included in the hazardous materials section and the storage of potentially dangerous chemicals. I'd be curious to explore that topic a little bit more and see if anyone else has been thinking about that and things that we can specifically target in the plan as we're writing it.
Fortunately, we have an expert on this actual call itself who is very interwoven into the agricultural community in a lot of different ways that you probably don't realize. But Mr. Tony Nye is on the call, and if he's not silently cursing himself that I called out his name, he may be able to talk a little bit more on this topic and identify, if it is a concern, just how big of a concern it is. So, Tony?
Well, Tom, from the agricultural, can you hear me all right, first of all?
Yep.
Okay. From the agricultural side, as far as from farm to farm, minimal amounts are stored. Although in our pest ed program, we generally recommend to farmers to communicate with their fire departments or have areas in their buildings where they store those facilities marked. So if there is ever a barn fire in that regard. As far as our ag businesses that would maintain larger amounts of product, they are generally already earmarked in the community as a viable hazard with, I would guess, the fire departments most of all. But there again, product is shifting on quantities, so at different times of the year there's more on hand than others. So as we're getting closer to harvest, we don't tend to see maybe as much on storage in a lot of farms, as well as some of the ag businesses. So that's what I can speak of from that standpoint. It is watched. Is it a huge concern? No, but it's always a concern when there's a fire or some kind of breakdown of storage structure in those regards. I'm sure we've got other facilities and other businesses that probably have as much or more explosive types of products, but I'm not the one to be addressing that. So I don't know, Tom, if that's enough that you need, or what else you were thinking I might share that if you give me a little direction, maybe I can add a little bit more to what you're thinking.
Well, when people start thinking about what happened in Beirut, right now the working theory is that the fireworks that were stored in a warehouse that caused a fire that then impacted another warehouse near next door that had stored somewhere in the neighborhood of over 2,700 metric tons of ammonia nitrate, which is a variation fertilizer and can be used as a low-grade explosive. When we start looking at what we have agriculturally in this county, most of the stuff, well, agriculturally focused in terms of this conversation, this is stuff that's usually intended for application on ground, preparing for putting in plants, insecticides, and so forth. And the period that we have that really focuses on when the quantities build up, when it's actually applied at the different farm sites, usually the buildups is somewhere around March timeframe, and April is mostly the biggest time frame for the couple of companies that support a lot of the actual farmers locally. And I believe someone put us on hold.
Yeah, I would
A good rule of thumb.
agree on those comments, Tom.
If I can just real quickly get a quick note, if you are on the call, please do not place us on hold. If you do, unfortunately, we get to hear your hold music. But going back to Tony, in terms of telling the difference between what we saw in Beirut, that people were concerned about an explosive hazard, as opposed to what we have in terms of other chemicals that could actually present a downwind respiratory hazard. I think there's a big difference, and the window of concern is maybe a lot smaller. Your thoughts, Tony?
Yes. Yeah, I would agree, and you're pinpointing that time frame when we see quantities at higher amounts. That would also be pretty accurate, especially when we're looking at like the nitrogen type compounds that sometimes gets a little bit more publicity from an explosion standpoint and those kinds of things. But all in all, I think what Tom is sharing, it's a concern, but it's not at the level or the intensity that we would have seen like we did the last couple of days in another country.
Okay, thank you so much for your input. Are there any other questions or thoughts regarding the priorities for the hazards from the previous meeting? All right, then we will jump into the next step of the final survey for this process. So today we are asking you to complete the mitigation action scoring matrix. And this allows us to, or I guess turns to you and asks if you think a mitigation action is appropriate for your jurisdiction. And if you think it is appropriate, then we are asking you to rate it on a series of categories based on your specific knowledge. So I will go ahead and pull up a PDF of this. I will also have the link to the website posted back in the chat. I know some people have access to physical copies. If you are having a difficult time either accessing the survey on the website or getting your hands on the survey, they should have been emailed out to everyone. Just let us know. We can email one directly to you. We can work with you to make sure that you get these surveys. So I'll go ahead and pull up again on the website. If you are here, burtonplanning.com/ClintonHMP, you can click on Meeting 2 Materials, and the survey mitigation action scoring matrix is here. If you want to go through it kind of at the same rate as us, I do recommend doing the fillable version and downloading it and completing it either by hand or an Acrobat. The online survey works just as well. So it's really whichever you prefer. I'll be working off of the PDF, the fillable survey version. I'll give you just a couple minutes to get that, or a couple, 30 seconds or so to get that pulled up. Again, if you're having any trouble accessing it, just let us know. We'll walk you through it. All right, so the purpose of this survey, my chat box is in the way. I'm trying to figure out how to, there we go. Okay, so as part of the hazard mitigation planning process, we ask you as representatives of your communities to identify specific projects and activities, and that's what we refer to as mitigation actions, that will help your communities achieve long-term outcomes related to preparing and reducing risk associated with hazard events. The status of each mitigation action that was included in your previous plan was reviewed at our last meeting, and we've incorporated those into this mitigation action scoring matrix, along with some new actions that were identified based on your feedback. So the purpose of this scoring matrix is to determine which mitigation actions are relevant to your communities and develop a corresponding action plan that describes how the mitigation actions will be implemented. So scores collected from this survey are really important for us in order for us to identify the prioritization of these actions and recommend in the plan how they can be administered and incorporated into your county's existing planning mechanisms. So the instructions are here on the first page. To complete this matrix, we're asking you to review each proposed mitigation action and indicate if it's applicable for your jurisdiction. If it is applicable, we just ask you to select yes or no. If it is applicable and you select yes, we're asking you to score it on a scale of 1 to 5 for each category that I'm about to describe. For each category, a rating of 1 is the lowest score, a rating of 3 is neutral, and a rating of 5 is the highest score. So when we tabulate these, ultimately the projects with the highest scores, collectively the highest scores, so out of 25 being the possible total score, the closer to 25 the score, the higher that project will be prioritized on the list. And the lower the score, that means ultimately it's a challenging thing to implement. It's really expensive. I'll go through that here in a little bit. So again, first we're asking you if it's applicable. You'll select yes or no. The second thing to consider, and this is the first category, is its cost effectiveness. The cost effectiveness of each proposed mitigation action we're asking you to consider. So 5 is the most cost effective and 1 is the least cost effective. And this is the category that trips people up the most when they're completing this survey, just because it's kind of backwards from what you might be thinking. If you score it a 1, that means the project is very expensive. If you score it a 5, that means that it's really cost effective. So it's I mean, there are multiple ways to define cost effective, but essentially the cheaper the project is as a 5. So again, 1 is expensive, 5 is affordable. For 3, then we ask you to consider its feasibility, with 5 being the most feasible and 1 being the least feasible. The third category is environmentally sound. We ask you if the proposed mitigation impacts the environment in a negative way. If it impacts the environment negatively, it would be a 1, meaning it's the least environmentally sound. If it impacts the environment, if it has 0 impacts to the environment or has a positive impact, it would be a 5, meaning it's the most environmentally sound. Next, we ask you to consider the immediate need of the project. If the project was needed, a year or two ago, it's needed immediately in order to reduce risk, you would mark it a 5. If the project is not needed immediately, if it can go a couple years before it's implemented, you would score it as a 1. And then risk reduction, we ask you to consider the extent to which that project will reduce the total risk of associated with that hazard. So 5 means that it will reduce the risk significantly, and 1 means it will have very little contribution to reducing risk. So I know that's a lot. We'll go through here a couple examples together, and then we'll go through page by page. So that way you have the opportunity to ask questions, but we are really trying to set this time aside for you to complete these surveys now, so that way we can get them, use them to start updating your plan. So we'll jump in here. First and foremost, please write your name and who you're representing. At the top here, there's a spot for that, your name and your jurisdiction, or if you're not with a specific jurisdiction, you can put your organization. Okay, so I am looking for some comments here as I go, whether that's from Tom or hopefully some of you as stakeholders can unmute yourselves and kind of help contribute to this. We'll just do the first 2 or 3 here kind of as examples, and then again, I'll kind of guide you through page by page after that. So the first action or recommended project is collaborate with public and private sector interests to obtain or create information regarding disaster preparedness, recovery assistance, and other post-disaster strategies for citizens and businesses. So that's mitigation action number 1. The new or previous indicates whether or not it was included in your previous plan. So previous means it was in your 2016 plan and it was marked as ongoing in the last survey we did. So
if I can just pop in real quickly on this one.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, so an example of how this might read is when it says collaborate with public and private sectors, this might be working with the American Red Cross. For instance, American Red Cross has a new online option to be able to put information about your business into basically a Mad Libs. If you remember the old Mad Libs games you used to play when you're on the long car rides before we had all these touch devices, where you ask for a noun, an adjective, and so forth, and you would come up with basically this funny thing that you would read. Well, they essentially have a plan outline to where, as a business, as an example, you start putting in this information. At the end of it, it spits out a finalized plan. So an example of this would be to work with the American Red Cross. For our portion, it would be working with the Red Cross out of Chillicothe because of the new alignment, and integrate that as an example into our EMA website. So the big question is this applicable to our jurisdiction? I would probably say yes. Now I would have to determine on a scale of 1 to 5, or yes, where that would be. It is applicable. Cost effective. Well, if it's something that's already there and it's just linking all the information together, it may be real easy to do. So it's a 5. As an example, very cost effective. Technically feasible. Well, I might have to get someone who's kind of smart with maybe some Java code or some of the other stuff, but we got some real smart people out there. So it's not insurmountable. I would probably say maybe about a 4. Environmentally sound, well, certainly it's not going to impact anyone negatively. So in this example, I would say a 5. And the immediate need, well, if we start looking at some of the different challenges that we've had over the last 2 years as an example, I think there is an immediate need because of the tornadoes, the shooting we had in the Oregon district, the flooding hazards that we have. Hey, we're in a pandemic right now. We had wildfires, we had murder hornets, all kinds of different things. So I would say an immediate need, sure, either a 4 or a 5, depending upon how you do it individually. And then risk reduction. Now, this is the key part. For something like this, for this to actually be beneficial and work, this actually requires the individual who's receiving or accessing the information to take action on it. So for something like this, it's kind of how you read, will people do it? And then you just pick your score. I would say probably about a 3. Um, most people will probably say, yeah, we kind of have a plan in place. Some people probably go, we're good, we don't have to worry about it. And then if you have any comments at the end is where you would type. So for instance, on mine, I typed in, this requires action by the individual for this to actually have some sort of benefit. And that's just kind of how I did the first one.
Thank you. That is super
Was that
helpful.
helpful?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was a great example. And I think with that, what I'll actually do is give you an opportunity, give each of you an opportunity to kind of read through the first page of actions and rate them on your own. So we recommend that everyone completes their own survey and turns it in through email or regular mail to the county EMA. And you can also fill it out online, and that goes directly to us. So we are looking here. I'll just let you, actually, why don't I give you a minute or two to go through the first 5. And if you have any questions, you can unmute yourself, feel free to ask those. And if you want to start a dialogue about a specific one, if you're unsure, we encourage that. I think there are multiple representatives from Wilmington on the line, multiple county level representatives. Do we have any other jurisdiction representatives on the call?
I'm scrolling for the list here. We've got a trustee, a county engineer, commissioner. Oh, we also have someone from the National Weather Service who I know is dying to talk about weather. We've got another trustee, members from the health district, the local waterworks. So we've got a little bit of a mix of folks. And just a pro tip, we do have the link. Brett put the link inside the chat. So if you'd like to do it online and not have to worry about filling out a form or whatever, there you go. But I think I heard someone ask a question, so I'm going to go ahead and mute my microphone.
Okay, does anyone have any questions about this process?
So I've got a question. If you went through the online version already, can you go back in and change things, or is it already?
The online version, unfortunately, you cannot go back and change. However, if you change your mind, you can go through and just go specifically to the actions that you want to change your score. You don't have to fill the whole thing out again. You can just do the specific ones that you want to update, and we'll update your scores for you. I'll just give you another couple minutes to finalize your scores for the first 5 actions here, and then I'll be curious to see, maybe we can just go through the applicability, see if representatives from Wilmington and the county levels and any others who want to contribute say yes or no to the applicability part.
And I do want to put a bug in someone's ear when we get to question or action number 11. I'm
Okay.
going to ask if Rick would be able to talk a little bit about that and what would be required. And I've got a call.
Okay. Do we have any questions on these first 5 actions? Did the scoring process make sense? Those are kind of, I'm curious, you know, as I'm leading this, if it makes sense. Are you guys actively filling it out, or are there things that I can help make it easier for you and help describe things more? And my colleagues are also reminding me, if you prefer not to just unmute yourself and ask a question directly, you can message them individually and send a chat specifically to them, so that way, and they can help address your questions as well. So then let's move on to the section related to dam failure. There are just these 2 actions, number 6 and 7. The first is coordinate with the ODNR to update dam safety plans and increase inspection rates on at-risk dams. And that was from your previous plan. Then a new action that we've included is map inundation areas for all Class 1 and Class 2 dams. So that's a new action. Why don't you guys take a minute to complete those? And if you're moving faster than me, that's completely all right. We'll move on to drought next. And we know some of you might not be able to stay for the full 2 hours that were scheduled. I don't know that we'll take up the whole 2 hours. But if you need to leave, we do request that you complete these. We're aiming to have them all collected by the county by August 21st at the latest. So if you would complete it, send it to your colleagues, recommend that they go to the website and check it out. Please have these completed and emailed to the county no later than the 21st. Okay, and moving on to drought, I know Tom called out someone, but I didn't catch the name for number 11. So if that person is still on the line and they remember being called out to help discuss this, feel free to unmute yourself. We can also check back in with Tom when he gets off his call. Are there any questions about the drought section as you get to that? Okay, then we'll move on to the drug misuse and addiction section that you all rated just a minute ago. We have 4 actions that we've developed. The trick with this section is that these plans don't typically address drug misuse. And so we've included it as a way to help spark conversation and help kind of navigate these initial conversations for the county, and maybe kind of get some of these initial actions and planning mechanisms in place surrounding this issue. So we'd be curious, based on these 4 actions, I would love to have someone kind of let us know if you would have any additions or comments about what we've included. And actually, I see that Tom has rejoined us. Tom, we didn't quite catch the name of the person that you were turning to for number 11. So feel free to chime back in with that. But we can also just move on to, go ahead.
Yeah, that would be Rick Schaefer. Although I believe it was Travis Lucan that came up with the initial piece. I'm not sure. My memory is getting up there a little bit, but I think if there's anyone in this group that would be able to handle that question, that may be Rick if he hasn't been pulled off on another call.
Okay. Seems like he's not here at the moment. So we'll go ahead and move on. Does anyone have any comments about numbers 14 through 17? Feel free to post any comments in the chat. You can also, if you want to follow up with us afterwards, send us an email. My email will be back on the presentation here in a little bit.
I just want to add a bit here. Just like what Anna said earlier, drug misuse and addiction itself is not something that is normally in here. However, the way that we're trying to leverage it is as it's creating man-made issues that we have to deal with. And while we don't expect this to move the needle really in any way, shape, or form with FEMA, it does give us a platform to be able to put information in and carry on the conversation, so that hopefully on down the line, that if we have enough communities that are identifying this as problems and concerns, that maybe there will be some sort of better solution that becomes available that we'll be able to look to or to leverage. So we, once again, no way, shape, or form should this solve any of the current issues, but it's just a way of being able to get it out there and get it documented.
Thank you. Any other additions to that from anyone? Okay. Then I'll keep scrolling here. The next page has several hazards. I'll give you a minute to go through earthquakes, epidemic, and pandemic, as well as extreme temperatures. And if you have any specific questions about those 3 groups, feel free to let us know. And if you're curious as you're going through the extreme temperature projects, those include both extreme cold, preparing for extreme cold, as well as extreme heat. That's why they're kind of varied in what they're addressing in that category. The next section is flooding. And that section includes a couple actions that were included in the previous plan, as well as several new actions. So if you have any questions both on either the old actions or the new actions, please let us know. Or if we can help answer any questions related to any hazards at this point, please just let us know. Okay. And again, the next three, there are only a few projects. The one for hazardous materials carries on from the previous plan with the goal of completing a commodity flow study for the county. We also have recommended completing an invasive species study. And then there are some projects related to landslides and mapping landslide risk areas in the county and limiting development in those risk areas. So if you have any questions about those, feel free to let us know. If you kind of went ahead, which is perfectly, that's great. Would you just let us know in the chat if you've finished, either if you're on SurveyMonkey, excuse me, or if you're just on doing your survey by hand. If you just let us know when you're done, that way we can kind of get a general sense of when we should wrap things up. Or if I'm going too fast, please let me know. Okay, so I'll give you just the next chunk of time to finish, but I do want to draw your attention as you're going through here. If you're like, this seems to be missing, if you know of a project or specific area of concern that you feel is significantly missing and you want that project included, the very last page of your survey or at the very end of the SurveyMonkey version, there's this page where you can add new projects. So you can just give us a little introduction to that action or the project that you want completed. Or if it's a specific problem area, like you know a road that consistently floods, you can put that there. Identify which hazard that goes with and then rate it. If we don't get the ratings, we just definitely need your ratings in order to include it in the plan. So be sure to do that. So I'll give you the next 10 minutes or so to finish everything up. Feel free to ask any questions, unmute yourself. I'll check back in a couple minutes. But just let us know if you need anything. Thank you. All right, well, I'm just gonna hop back in and persistently ask if anyone needs any help filling this out, or if you have any questions, if there's anything that you feel like you need help with and or more information on in order to complete your survey, please let us know. And also if you can, again, indicate when you've finished, and then I can proceed with some next steps and what to look for after today. Okay, a couple people have indicated that they've finished. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and return to the presentation and just kind of give you a sense of what the next steps are in this process. If you're not done, that's perfectly okay. We have until 4:30. We can be here as long as you need to help answer any questions that you have. But we'll just go ahead and go through the next steps. My broken record announcement that if you have not yet signed in using either SurveyMonkey or by emailing myself or Tom, or just typing your name in the chat, please do so. That really helps us identify, make sure that we have an accurate representation of who joins the meeting. If you've called in by phone and have not texted or emailed either me or Tom, please do so. Again, my number is 614-406-7775. Okay, then I'll go ahead. So next steps, I guess in general, please keep an eye out for more emails from Tom. We will be following up with jurisdictions that have not participated yet. And we will also be following up around November to have all of you review the draft plan. So for those of you who are completing your surveys by hand, that's perfect. We recommend that you scan those in and email them to Tom, or you can also mail them to Tom as well. My contact information, as well as Tom's, is on the screen. Please do not hesitate to reach out with any questions, any follow-up that you have. We welcome comments throughout the entirety of the planning process, whether or not that's through a survey. So if you have additional things that you would like to bring up to us, please do so. Don't hesitate. We'd love, the more feedback, the better. Again, the more we hear from you, the more targeted this plan can be towards your needs. So with that, I know we've had a few more people complete their surveys. If you've completed your survey, unless you have any follow-up questions, you are free to go. Again, we'll be here on the call till 4:30. For those of you who want to just stick around and finish your survey with us now, feel free to do so. So thank you again to everyone for joining us this afternoon. We appreciate it.
And when I sent out the reminder this morning, I got quite a few out of office messages. So I'm going to have quite a bit of follow up at the beginning of next week. So I will give you a list.
Okay, that sounds good. And we'll be sure to let you know everyone that signed in today and all the surveys that we've received so far. Yeah, does seem
Well,
like
I'll export the list and then also get you the video link. Matter of fact, let me go ahead and turn the video off, or the recording.